today too.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so now we're going to discuss a little bit more about the Elm Tree of Mastery. And the Elm Tree of Mastery is simply just a scoreboard definition of winning and a mastery definition of winning. And just to kind of sum that up for you, a scoreboard definition is simply just the way that you're coaching is result driven. You're not allowing your players to hit their peak performance because they're afraid to make mistakes. They have fear of mistakes, and we want them to know that mistakes are okay. And then also the other component is comparing themselves to others, and that happens a lot with athletes. I know I did that. I mean, I still do that today with just other people in general. So really, really honing down the concept of allowing them to play freely and not compare themselves to others. And then we have the other side, which is mastery definition of winning. And the way that, to summarize that quickly, is that we're talking about, we're really focused on effort rather than their results. We're focused on allowing them to continue to learn the game, and then, you know, I already kind of discussed this, but the opposite of the scoreboard definition, that mistakes are okay. Okay, and then, so I want to jump into a little bit of a scenario, and I want you guys to think about a time when the game was on the line. Maybe, you know, if it's, you know, basketball, the clock has little to no time left and you're down by 1, or maybe, you know, it's the 7th inning in softball, or I'm not sure what kids have in baseball now. I don't know if they go to the 9 innings. I think it might be 7. But, you know, that ending point where the game's on the line, and I want you to think of a scenario that you have been in personally as a coach with your players. And you have to give some final words, a pep talk in the timeout right before they get back on the field or the court, whatever that situation is. And I want you to, whatever you said, I want you to kind of push that aside, and I want you guys to help me give an example of what you would say if you were a scoreboard definition of winning kind of coach. So can I have a volunteer tell me what you would say to your players if you were more of a results-driven coach?
So the scenario that I thought of was I was coaching a 14 and under club volleyball team that was a strong team, and and actually we had won all our tournaments, and we got into a tournament and we were in the semifinals playing a team that we had beaten several times, and we were losing, and the players were getting frustrated, and one of them shouted out to the other players, "We have to win this game."
Right.
And so anyway, so if I was scoreboard oriented, and I called a timeout, if I was scoreboard focused, I'd say, "Connor's right. We have to win this game. If we lose, we're eliminated from the tournament. We've beaten this team all year long, and there's no way we should lose to this team."
Right.
So that's the type of talk I think I would have given that would have been scoreboard focused.
Okay. And how is that going to make your kids feel when they get out onto the court then?
Well, it would have added to, I think it would have added to their anxiety.
Right.
And the pressure that Connor, who was I love Connor, he's a great kid. But in that moment, the pressure that Connor was putting on himself and his teammates, I would have just compounded it. I don't think it would have helped.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can feel the pressure already. I'm thinking of times when I was like, oh, we have to win this game. Like, this team is way below us. Like, we should win this game. And like, to put that kind of pressure on you, just like, I feel like it automatically just sets you up for failure, you know? Okay. So on the opposite side, if someone has another situation that they can share that they have been in, what kind of talk would you give to your kids if you were a mastery definition of winning kind of coach?
Kelly?
I think just encouraging them to just keep working as hard as you're working. I always find that even if they're not working hard, if I kind of tell them they are, then they will kind of live up to it. So I've said to my players before, like, you remember what we did at practice yesterday? I don't want you to think about the scoreboard. I just want you to focus on what we did, like passing the ball. I want you to keep possession of the ball as much as you can. So if it drops, pick it up. If you can pass it to our players, like a big game of keep away, and just totally not even have them thinking about scoring at all. Just have them keep being, focusing on possession of the ball. And it just seems to make everybody else more relaxed.
Right. It's like giving them something that they can actually control.
Yeah. I was laughing at your last scenario. I seriously remember my first year of coaching basketball, our cheer, like going into the last couple minutes of the game, I remember pulling them out and our cheer was no mistakes.
Yeah.
Like I seriously remember talking about, okay, we're going to make no mistakes in the last 2 minutes of the game. That's how we're going to win this.
Yeah.
And like later on, I'm like, what the heck was I doing?
Everything is just so tense. You're like, well, I can't make a mistake. So then you make a mistake.
That was our rally cry. No mistakes.
You're thinking mistakes in your head the whole time. And that's something I've really had to learn over a long period of time as an athlete as well, is instead of saying like, don't strike out, don't strike out, don't strike out. It's like, hit the ball or see the ball or something much more positive. Which is really hard to do because your brain like automatically wants to think of the negative way to do it rather than the positive way to do it. Right. Those are really good examples. And I mean, we could probably talk about 100 more scenarios like that. So in order for our athletes to have a peak performance, we want to be able to allow the athletes to believe in themselves and believe that they can get better. And this kind of is like the learning portion. So it's funny because I've been to quite a few practices that I go and speak at, and I get to talk to these coaches beforehand, just kind of, talking about their team and their dynamics. And it's funny because they always are telling me, who's the talented players, and, Susie needs a little more work, or, and it's funny because they always say how talented someone is or one of their players are. And it's interesting because now that I teach these trainings, and I'm in these trainings with you guys and learning the concepts and getting better at them, I'm much more aware of it. And now I'm like, when I hear these coaches telling me this, I'm thinking immediately, maybe we should replace talented with, they work really hard, or because when you're telling a player that they're talented and, they're going to go to the next level because they're talented, that they might lose sight of that they actually need to work hard and the belief that they can get better. And the same goes for someone that, maybe a little bit lower level. So that's just something I've been thinking of a lot lately. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this just a second ago, is giving these athletes the feeling of control. I know myself as an athlete, I really had to focus on the things that I could control. And that was like my routine before my at-bat, or even, my routine before the game. It could be like silly, what's the word I'm looking for? Where people have they have to tie their left shoe before their right shoe. Just routines and visualizing success, keeping my balance at bat or staying low. And these are all things that I can control. I can't control if I'm going to get a hit over if I'm going to hit a home run or if I'm going to get an RBI. I can't control those things. So what are some comments or direction that you can give your players that you think that will give them more confidence and control?
I think one of the things that we talk about on our team a lot is just what you have control over. So I always tell them, you don't have control over what happens, but you have control over how you react to it. So I'm constantly telling them, your reaction is what's important, your reaction. And so your reaction can either be head down, upset, mad, ticked off at yourself, or your reaction can be a challenge. All right, I blew that. Now let's go back and recover quickly. So I think that gives the kids confidence because they can control how they react. They can't control what happened. Right.
It's like you're controlling your attitude, which can also be very difficult. But if, as long as we're thinking about it and being more aware of it, it will get easier. Just like practicing a skill, it'll get easier. Any other, Ruben, did you have any the comments or directions that you can give your players that will help them feel like they have more control?
I think reminding them of their preparation and the team's preparation, mm-hmm. You know, and the work that we've put in. Mm-hmm. I think that helps them feel more in control.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I had that a lot. One of my coaches is really great at that. They're like, if you put in the work, you don't have to think about it anymore. And that's stuck with me for a long time. But I think the more that your team feels like they are in control, the more likely we're going to win. And I know obviously we're talking about having a mastery definition of winning instead of a scoreboard definition of winning. But we're not trying, we don't want to lose. No one wants to lose, but the more control you can give and the more that you can coach with this mastery definition, it's more likely that they're going to succeed. Okay, so I have another little scenario and like visual going back to with your own personal team and experiences, but it's this tentative play. So you guys have all experienced this probably with your teams where your team is playing tense, almost like the scenario you gave earlier, Ruben, where the game's on the line and you're coaching with a result-driven kind of type approach, and they're feeling like all the pressure is on them. So this is that scenario. It feels like awkward. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of stress, and your team is playing tentatively, and they're not playing loose and free and playing to win. And I call this playing to lose. And I remember clearly especially in college, when we were definitely playing to lose. We weren't playing to just be our best, which really hindered us as a team. So things I like to think about are, just like leave it out on the field, or, give it my best shot, have a quality at bat, no matter what happens, and or just breathe. So I wanted to find out what kind of experiences you guys have had with your team and how you handled it as a coach.
So Paige, going back to what I was, that scenario, that real life scenario that I was telling you about, mm-hmm. I told you about what I would say if I was scoreboard focused. Mm-hmm. What I actually said to the team is, remember Connor had shouted out to the teammates on the court, guys, we have to win this game.
Right.
So in the timeout, I called them over and I asked the group, I said, do we have to win this game? And they looked at me kind of funny, like, yeah, of course we have to win or else we're eliminated, And actually Connor spoke up and he said, well, yeah, because if we lose, we're out. This is an elimination game. And I said, well, we really want to win, don't we? We want to win. And that's different than we have to win. Life will go on. There'll be another tournament.
Right.
After this, we can still accomplish our goals for the season. And so we're going to do everything we can to try to win this game, but we don't have to win. And who knows how it might have turned out. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I'm going to leave that out because the outcome really isn't important to the story.
Right. That's a great example.
I want to know. No. Just kidding.
Did you have an experience an experience where your team was playing tentative and like tense and uptight, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, I've just seen a lot of different teams I've coached where they're winning and they're playing great and loose, and then as soon as they start losing, they completely shift to just being scared and nervous and just playing really safe. And it's frustrating because I used to tell the kids, like, start the game like you're winning. Let's go into this game from, the first minute. And I want you guys in the back of your mind to just assume that you're winning by 4 goals. You're up by 4 goals. So I used to just try to tell them that, like, you're up by 4, you're up by 4. And sometimes they were like, no, we're not, we're losing by 3. I'm like, that was my, like, come on, play like you're up by 4, play. And it, you know, I don't know if it worked, but it helped them to feel relaxed because they were just much more relaxed when they were, winning.
And something I think too, as a coach, when you're saying those things and they're, you know, they're ultimately looking up to you because, you know, you've had experience, you're in charge. And when they see that, I feel like that even if maybe it's the first time you've done that, maybe they won't believe you. But if you continuously do it and stay consistent with it, I think that they'll start to really believe in that thought and that mentality. That was just something that I kind of thought of when you were talking about that. Okay, so we have a couple of takeaways, and this is our toolkit. Like, what kind of tools can we use when these situations come up in the games or at practice when you're coaching? So we talked about focusing on effort rather than the results. And we talked about having a more aggressive approach rather than the tentative approach and how to accomplish that. So one of my favorite tools to use for this is the mistake ritual. It's my favorite because it's something I actually did use when I was playing softball. It took me way too long to figure this out, but in college, this is something I used all the time. And after like swinging and missing, or maybe it was like way over my head and like just feeling totally embarrassed, but I still have a full at bat ahead of me. So how am I going to get back into the box with the right mindset and not swing and miss at the second one? So I had this mistake ritual, and it was I would step out of the box after I swung and missed and made a fool of myself, and I would take the Velcro on my batting gloves, and I would just undo them and then do them. And what that meant to me was that and the other thing I would do too was I would take a big deep breath, because that allowed me to relax my shoulders, relax my thoughts, calm my thoughts. But taking those batting gloves off and on was a signal to me and my brain that I was ripping that off. It was in the past. I can't do anything about it, and I'm ready for the next pitch. It was like very simple, easy, and I did that every time, and it really helped me get back into focus so that I could be the best that I could in the next pitch.
Paige, what if it was strike 3?
That's a good question. So when strike 3, after I've learned more of these mistake rituals, I would put myself in timeout for at least a minute or two. So, you know, putting my stuff away. Well, first, you know, high-fiving the girl that's going up to bat next to me and give them what I can. Sometimes that might be like a fake it till you make it, because you're upset, you're angry with yourself. I would go sit down in the dugout and I would be in timeout, and I would just I would think about what happened. Obviously there was failure, and then I tried to pull whatever success or what I succeeded at in that at bat. Because there's a lot of failures and successes in just one at bat. You know, maybe I struck out, but it was a good at bat. Maybe I fouled off, 9 pitches before that. So I need to take that away and use that for my next at bat. So that was what I did if I struck out, and that took a lot of practice. But it was extremely helpful and made me a much better hitter. So what are some routines that you guys have had either personally or that you can implement for your team, for your kids?
Well, in volleyball, volleyball's like softball. It's action, and then there's time in between. And
right.
like what you were doing mentally with the time in between is so important. And so in volleyball, the time in between rallies is usually longer than the actual rally. And so in volleyball, coaches teach players, if you're serving the ball to the other team, to as soon as possible, look across the net and see what rotation the other team is in. Where are their hitters lined up? Is their setter in the front row, back row? Because that makes a difference. Because so the in between serves is not mindless time, or it's not time thinking about winning or losing. It's focusing on things that we can control and gaining information that's going to give us a better chance to win the next point.
Yeah, definitely. Something I can think of right away. I played volleyball as well. Is when it gets dusty on the court and your shoes, your court shoes are getting like slippery, I would always just like wipe my shoes on my socks. And that could be kind of like a mistake ritual, is like wiping it away, taking a deep breath, and getting ready for what's to come next. Like, what can I do next to help the team, or what can I do next to succeed in this small amount of time? Did you have any other, Kelly?
I think for me personally, I always had like some type of, I didn't call it a mistake ritual at the time, but I remember I had a coach that once said, you get 3 seconds to beat yourselves up after a mistake. So 1 is to get mad at yourself and realize what you did. 2 is to get your head back in the game. And 3 is to get focused on the next play. So I would always do something in 3s. If I had a stick in my hand, it was like banging the stick on the ground 3 times, or clap my hand 3 times, or whatever it took. But the only time I found a struggle with that, when I was in college, I ran track. And one of the first big races, like an actual race that I was in, I false started, and I was a sprinter. So it was like 100 yards. And I've never had a sport where like you can't run because you made a mistake. Like I was out. And I just remember thinking like, my 3 things won't help me now, because I literally cannot run in this race because I false started. And so that was where I started thinking about like, how do you get, I guess it's like striking out, I never played softball, but where you're like, wow, you're done. Like you can't even, I never played a sport where if you make a mistake, like you're done. You can't go out until the next race or the next time. All the sports I ever played is like, you'll get the ball back again, or you'll play again, or somebody else will, pick you up. And
at the end of the game, like losing. So like, how do you handle a loss?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's kind of similar to that. And actually you reminded me of something. Oh no, I think I might've lost it. Oh, no. Something that I have learned recently that has been extremely helpful for me in my personal life, and I truly believe it would help in sports as well, is we have a lot of this negative self-talk. And we're like, if you false start, you're like, oh my gosh, like I suck. I'm a horrible track runner, or like I'm never going to be able to succeed at, or like I'm never going to win this race. So something you can do after that, and like when you're at home or you have some more time to reflect on it, is write those things that you said in your head down, and then really look at them and be like, I'm a horrible runner. Like that's not true. And then write not true. And just really work through it. I think that's something that I've done too, and I do it while I'm journaling. But I was just thinking of that when you mentioned that, and it popped up into my brain. That's been super helpful for me. Okay, so we're gonna watch this little video about mistake rituals and flushing it. So we'll take a second and watch this. And we watched it. And now that we've learned about emotional being connected and the emotional tank and improving the Elm Tree of Mastery, we'll go into this concept of honoring the game.
All right. Thanks, Paige. Good timing.
Much faster.
That was good. Nicole had to log off. She she sent me a text. She was like, I'm so sorry I had to leave. But she said she's going to send some feedback so we can get that to you. Yeah, she didn't do it yet. That's okay. But I would love to hear from Ruben. Ruben, this is now the 3rd time that you've seen Paige, right?
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear. I like to kind of bring the feedback now into like what kind of things can help her as she moves forward in front of live people at live workshops. I think the content she has down.
Yes, I'll try to do that, Kelly. I do want to say that I thought that this was the strongest of the 3.
Yay.
Yeah, I thought it was the strongest of the three. I thought that the two things you said you were going to try to do, weave in some of your own experience, and then get us thinking about scenarios. I think you accomplished both of those.
Thank you.
So congratulations on that. I thought one of the things that really stuck with me was your little story about how you often go to practices and consult or and how the coaches are always talking to you about which players are talented and which ones aren't. I thought that was really interesting, and brought a part of the Elm principle to life in a very tangible way. The other thing about your strength about your demo today was less tied to the PowerPoint. I mean, you utilized the PowerPoint. You definitely did, but you weren't. It wasn't driving you. It was, it was a tool as opposed to just the PowerPoint wasn't owning you. You owned the PowerPoint. You used it as a tool. So okay. So now what Kelly asked about, how do we fine tune? So at one point you were looking for a word, when you tie your left shoe before your first one, and I shouted out superstition. Yes. But I was on mute, so didn't do any good. So
Thank you.
yeah. You use the term playing to lose, which I've never heard that term. The term I've heard is playing not to lose.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. Maybe you meant playing to lose. I don't know. Maybe you meant playing to lose. But that, you know what? Whether it's playing to lose or playing not to lose, it's interesting because I actually think that another way of looking at Elm is the scoreboard definition is playing not to lose. And ironically, the mastery definition is playing to win. And I almost think I'm going to take this idea away from you, Paige, in terms of Elm and asking coaches before I even put up Elm, and the comparison is ask them, you ever heard the phrase playing not to lose? What's that mean? And then, so what's the opposite of playing not to lose? And somebody there will say playing to win. So what's playing to win, and get them to talk about it. And then anyway, I just really like that idea, Paige. So
I heard a trainer, just on that same vein, I heard a trainer recently say mastery or scoreboard focus is playing for a product, winning, and mastery focus is playing for a process. And I never heard that explained that way. Like if you focus on the process rather than the product, I thought that was kind of a good way to keep it in check, because you're looking for the product. The product is the win, and you either get it or you don't, versus the process of small wins along the way that are going to lead to the overall victory. So I thought that was interesting.
Jim Thompson talks about the irony of Elm. The irony is that by not focusing on winning and the scoreboard, like you said, you actually have a greater chance of winning, and that's why I like the playing not to lose and then playing to win. Yeah. Interestingly, playing to win is mastery.
Yeah.
Okay, what else here? I liked how you controlled your pace, Paige. I would say that when you get to mistakes are okay, I think that's one place in talking about the principle where you have to be careful not to just glaze over that. Okay. I think there has to be a little bit of, okay, wait a minute, why are mistakes okay? Why do you think PCA says that?
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be long, but I think there has to be a little bit of a pause there, and make sure they understand why PCA feels, why we say mistakes are okay.
Sometimes I get like wishy-washy answers for that, because I used to ask that all the time, like, why are mistakes okay? And now instead of that, I'll say, okay, we believe that the mastery-focused mistakes are okay. So I would let's see if we can come up with 5 aggressive, assertive mistakes that you want your players to make. Anywhere on the field, it would be completely excusable if a player makes a mistake in that way. And that, I think that gets coaches thinking about, like, yeah, if a kid's diving for a loose ball and it happens to go out of bounds, that's okay. If a kid is, just something that they're doing, because I think that sort of gets them thinking about mistakes are aggressive mistakes, assertive mistakes. If they're trying a new position, a new tactic, a new swing, a new something, and they make a mistake, that's the mistake that's okay. And then I say, any mistake's not okay. And it gets them thinking like, well, sometimes they'll say, well, mental mistakes are not okay. And that, you know, again, it can get into a whole discussion, but if you handle it well, like, well, what's the difference between a mental mistake? Well, if they're just not paying attention, why aren't they paying attention? Well, maybe you as a coach aren't communicating it well. Maybe you've droned the same thing into their head 50 times, you know, and I lead them to the conclusion that all mistakes, mental mistakes, physical mistakes, they're all mistakes. And if a kid is afraid to make a mental mistake, they're going to make more mental mistakes, you know, whereas if they know that you can use a mistake as a learning tool and you can use it as an opportunity, then they're not going to be afraid. Sorry, Ruben.
That's okay. No, that's okay. And then my last little thing before I turn it over to Kelly is,
excuse me.
When you said imagine, I want you to imagine a scenario that you were in, and so I imagine coaching my 14 and under volleyball team, and then you gave me the assignment to talk from a scoreboard focus. I described a very real coaching situation, and I think there was an opportunity there that I actually later jumped in with, okay, here's what I actually did tell them. But I actually think there's an opportunity there to say, well, what did you, you told me what you would say if it was scoreboard. What did you say to the team?
Okay.
Because I basically was saying, well, I did talk for mastery, but you're asking me about score, you know, so anyway, you know what I mean there, Paige?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think something I could do instead is ask them, you know, what did they say to their team, and let them give me what they said, and either say, well, can you give me a mastery definition of way to do that, or a scoreboard definition way of doing that. That way it kind of depends on how they're coaching, so that maybe they can think about it a little more.
I don't know. I would almost take that just in my head, thinking about giving them the scenario before they know the definition of scoreboard and mastery. Just put that up right up front. You know, here's the scenario. I want you to turn to a partner and reenact for them what you would say to your team, like with a partner or with a group, so they can talk about it, and then show them scoreboard versus mastery and say, okay, now go back to the same partner and figure out what parts of your message were scoreboard focused and which parts of your message were mastery focused. And that way it's like you're having them talk first with no prior knowledge at all. They have no idea what it is. They're just telling you what they do. Right. Then you're giving them a definition, and then you're showing them, guess what? Mastery works better. So they can take what part of your little speech to your kids is actually doing more damage than good. Right. You know what I mean? So it's not like having them plug in the definition. It's them going, wow, gosh, I do a lot of things that are scoreboard focused. That's not good. I'm going to change that.
Yeah, no, that's good.
So Paige, I really like what Kelly just said. And, you know, you've learned this along the way through your demos, that there's not just one way to do every part of the workshop. And I like what you did. I like Kelly's idea, and I like what you did. And I know why after I gave the scoreboard speech, or I know why you then went to Kelly, because you want to involve someone else. And so that's a good reason. I just thought that sometimes the best things in workshops are what you pull out of the participants and what comes up. And sometimes you make it come up, and sometimes it just pops up. And I think that was a nice opportunity to hear about something that really happened, not to you, but to one of your workshop participants.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
That's it, Kelly.
Okay. Thanks, Ruben. I just have a couple things, again, in the vein of fine tuning. A couple of the things that you mentioned and your own personal stories, they're PCA stuff. And so I just want to make sure, because as you go through and you become more comfortable with more workshops, you're going to have terminology that's going to come up in other workshops. And it's really cool if you come up with something and you're like, oh yeah, this is something we do a lot. And then you're like, yeah, we call it, PCA calls it, like the talent trap, for example. When you were talking about the idea of focusing on players' talent, Carol Dweck is one of our National Advisory Board members, and she uses the term the talent trap. And a lot of us as coaches fall into that, saying these players are talented, these players are not talented. And she calls it a trap because you're actually trapping players into thinking they have a fixed mindset, like I'm either talented or I'm not, and there's no room to grow. So just a term like I just wrote down, use the word talent trap instead. And you can give Carol Dweck credit because a lot of people know who she is.
Okay.
The other one that you did was when you were talking, I liked how you were talking about when you struck out that you actually coached yourself. Like, I think that's really important. I talk about that a lot in the athlete workshops. So what you were doing is we teach coaches to reward unsuccessful effort, which is one of the tools right on the screen. You were doing it to yourself. You were like, yeah, I kind of go over and I say, okay, what did you do well? And how did you, but use the term because it's actually right on the slide for this toolkit, rewarding effort, especially unsuccessful effort. So I think it's a good point to make. Like when I was an athlete, I actually had to coach myself through this.
Yeah.
If I had a coach that could coach me through this, it probably would have saved me a lot of aggravation. But, so I just think using terminology that's there is helpful. So the one thing that I missed about what you were doing was connecting it back to the terminology that we use. And like the book, you didn't mention the book at all. So when you get to the toolkit, explaining to them like, hey, you'll see these little yellow flags come flying in. They reference pages exactly in the book.
Okay.
And as Ruben said, we don't want you tied too much to the PowerPoint, but when you're giving some info on a tool, I mean, coaches like to be able to say, okay, here's where you can find more resources on this. So you might notice on page 27, they'll open up to page 27. This is rewarding unsuccessful effort. This is how I used it. Page 28 or 29, mistake ritual. If you want, just so they see where it is.
No.
But bring in your own stories on how you use it. I think that's great. And then ask another coach like you did. So what's a mistake ritual you use? Like you did a nice job with that. I thought that was great. The other thing too that I often use, like you kind of said, I think it's a little, and personally, I think it's a little clunky, like scoreboard definition, mastery definition. And you were like, somebody give me the scoreboard definition, winning coach explanation. Sometimes I'll just say a coach that's basing their success only on the scoreboard and a coach that's basing it on mastery. Or I'll say the win at all cost coach versus the mastery focused coach, just to make the lingo a little bit smoother than saying like the scoreboard definition winning coach, You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because it's the definition of what a lot of trainers will in the beginning will say it's the scoreboard definition versus the mastery definition. I'm like, definition of what? And we used to have at the top, redefine winning. And that's what the principle is called, redefining winning. And I'm going to push to go back to that because I think it's a lot clearer to understand. How do you look at winning? How do you look at success? So I like also the way you tied control to confidence and what do we do to actually foster confidence in our players. I think that was a really strong point too. I thought that was good. I'm going to encourage you to do a little bit more of getting us involved.
Okay.
I think this time, definitely your stories were great. Your questions were great. But when you ask someone a question in a workshop, if there's 50 coaches in a workshop and you ask somebody to raise their hand and answer a question, how many people are involved?
Right. Just one.
Right.
Maybe
so the other 49 can fall asleep. Okay. So if you encourage them to, I like to have people stand up, move around, find a partner, get on this side of the room, that side of the room, vote yes, move to this side, vote no, move to that side. That's just me. That keeps me awake during workshops.
Yeah.
But otherwise, even just, turning to somebody, talking, high-fiving, thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you think? That'll just get maximum participation at the same time. Okay. And then you're not going to have people like, whew, she didn't call on me, so I'm going to go back to Instagram,
Right.
Just a thought. I like the exact, like ripping the Velcro off. I mean, that's what coaches are looking for. Like that is, oh, that's easy. I can do that. What's in my sport like that? Oh, well, I wear a, elastic around my wrist. I can snap that. I don't have batting gloves, but that's something I can teach my players to do. So I thought that was great. The other thing is also, and I agree with Ruben, I like the way that you weren't like married to the PowerPoint. I think for you to practice it, because the PowerPoint's going to be there. Yeah. And you just want to make sure that what you're saying or hide slides you're not using is going along with what you're saying. Because I've seen sometimes where trainers are very comfortable with the content and they're sort of going off on a tangent that has to do with the content, but the slide behind them isn't matching up. Mm-hmm. And it's not really like, it's not making sense because they're talking about something, they might be talking about control while something completely different is up on the screen. So just practicing with, you're allowed to switch the order of the slide.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I probably just kind of rearrange some stuff before I actually do it. That way it makes sense the way that I'm talking about things. And then even if it was like the scoreboard definition flip-flopped with the scenario or, something like that.
Right. And just to know too, leading into this principle, the Carol Dweck video, and then the how do you get athletes to believe they can get better? That's sort of the intro, like the transition from emotional tank into this principle. So when you're starting, I mean, it's a perfect transition because you're just talking about filling the kids' emotional tanks. And now you're like, all right, now let's talk about performance. How do you believe athletes can get better? And I've often done the question first and then showed the Carol Dweck video because I'm a big person and like, I want to hear what they have to say first and then give them the answers. Yeah. I think it's hard when you show the Carol Dweck video first and then you're like, discuss with a partner how you think athletes can get better. And they're like, well, duh, Carol Dweck just told me. So, yeah. So I switch those around sometimes. But going over those three, like, wow, and when I put up the tell them you notice effort, become a noticer, attribute success to effort, I don't use that as like, I'm going to tell you these three things. I put them up all at the same time. And I say, how many of you mentioned at least one of those things? And they're like, oh, I did. Yeah. How many of you said, how many of you in your version of how athletes can get better said something about, you just told them. Yeah. How many of you said, I noticed it. I shouted out. I called it out. Yeah. How many of you are really focusing on the effort rather than the outcome? Yeah. So, that's how I use that. And then it goes into, so let's talk about, this is the principle, the second principle that's really important. This is all about peak performance. And this is how we're going to get there. And I love this because this is research-based, proven to increase performance. And I always say too, and I was doing it the wrong way. I was definitely focusing on the scoreboard because I thought that's how I thought if you focused on winning, you'd win more games. Duh, didn't really work. So anyway, just to lead into it, it's already built there for you and you can use it that way. Okay. But, so my challenge would be to try to get more participants involved. And then I love your stories too. I think it's awesome to ask a coach or an athlete for a story. Does anybody have an example of this? And if they have one, great. And if they don't, you could say, let me give you an example from my experience. Okay. And sometimes some of my best stories, I'm like, oh, I don't need to tell it. Like I have it there to tell, but somebody else told me a great story. And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't need to tell mine now because that one was better. Okay.
or yours is better than theirs, but theirs is good enough. And so you don't want to constantly one up their stories. Okay. You know what, right? Yeah. Does that make sense? Really, yeah.
And also a lot of like, if I'm in a group, they don't want to keep hearing my lacrosse, field hockey, basketball stories. If I'm in a group of baseball coaches, I want to hear from them more than I hear from me because they're going to be like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with, what I'm talking about, especially if you're doing like swimmers or, a totally different sport. I did a golf workshop one time. That was a struggle for me. I mean, it's like, but it was really a good workshop because I had to draw on their experience. Like, well, how the heck do you do rewarding, unsuccessful effort in golf? Duh, the ball didn't go where you wanted it. That's, so anyway, it's good sometimes when you have their stories to pull from. But I think you're definitely on your way. The content, it's just going to be a matter of practicing it. Yeah. And, I always tell people it takes like 10 workshops to feel the groove. Like, okay, I got this now because I know what I'm talking about. So try things, take risks, try group things. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But I think the coaches in the room will appreciate you using an illustration or an activity to show something rather than like just getting nervous and like saying, okay, I'm afraid I'm going to mess this up. So I'm just going to tell you. Yeah. I think people kind of fall back into the safe way is just for me to repeat what's on the slide. And, it bores coaches and they don't get anything out of it. Okay. I've had some activities fall flat on their face and the coaches at the end are like, that was a good try. We don't get what you're saying, but we appreciate the effort. I'm like, thank you. So we will, congratulations. Yeah, you're definitely going to be an associate trainer. I'll tell Nicole and Tamara, I'll send an email out so that you'll get connected to Sonia DeWitt, who's our trainer manager. And she wants to enter you in the system. So we're going to send your trainer application back. If anything's changed, your address, or you want to change your shirt size or whatever on there, that's where you do it. And then let me know what workshops work for your schedule and your time. And we'll get you caught up and hopefully get you out there as soon as we can.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Paige, for all the extra work.
Thank you. Yeah. I was just going to mention this too. I feel like way better on this one than I did on the first. Like amazing how much more comfortable I was just on this in 3 segments. So
yeah.
Well, that wasn't that bad.
I should have this recorded because I've had people say, can I just do one instead? I'm like, you're gonna like it. The more you get, the more you do, the more you practice, the better you get.
way better.
Does it sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? Paige, you've worked hard and prepared very well, and it's paid off.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yes.
Congratulations, Paige. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your guys' feedback. I'm very appreciated and helpful.